Here are our top 25 wide receivers for 2023 in fantasy football. Number 1, obviously, is going to be Justin Jefferson. He's a staple for your team. I'm okay taking him 101. And there's really not much else to say. His role should be similar to last year, and the past 2 years he's been amazing.
Yep. All right, so up at number 2, we have Jamar Chase. A lot of the same. There's not much to say. It's kind of an obvious pick. You just plug him into your lineup. He's elite as it gets.
Yeah, I would take him again at the 102. I'd be willing to take him as my corner piece. Only running back I'd really consider over him is Christian McCaffrey. Other than that, I'm taking all these wide receivers in this S tier for the most part. Which next up is Tyreek Hill. Again, I love Tyreek Hill at this spot in the sort of 5 to 7 range. If you can get Tyreek Hill in a lot of drafts, which you can, I find him to be a value at that spot. A good first-round receiver to grab.
Yep. Next up at the 4th spot, we got Cooper Kupp. And now this is a little bit of a risk pick just due to his age and Stafford's age. But if he's healthy and Stafford's healthy, Cooper Kupp could easily be the number 1 fantasy receiver. I mean, last year before he got hurt, I think he was averaging like 25, 26 points per game, which is 4 or 5 more points than what Justin Jefferson. Like, sure, it might be a little risky, but it may pay off and just win you your league.
He has the upside to absolutely be the first overall. The only reason he's down here is just because there's a little bit of risk. And this tier list, the ranking that we're doing, is just based on where we would draft him. So because of that risk, he's down a little bit further. And to round out the S tier, Stefon Diggs. I want one of these 5 receivers, and Diggs, because of his elite talent, his elite quarterback play, and his elite offense, and that number 1 role he has there, I consider him to be in that tier of, I want one of these guys in the first round. And a lot of times, Diggs is a great target because sites have him ranked wide receiver 9, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 10. But, we think that he's around wide receiver 5. So you can, a lot of times at the back of the first round, if you have an 11th or 12th pick, sometimes you can leave with Diggs as your first round pick. I like leaving with one of these top 5 receivers.
All right, so to start off our second tier, which is the A tier, will be Ceedee Lamb. Ceedee is basically the same role he was the past 2 years. He had an 80.6 and 81% of his route participations of the Dallas Cowboys. Targets remained basically the same between the past 2 years, and I imagine he'll have the same exact role as that. He does add Brandon Cooks to his receiving core of competition, but ultimately I think his role is set in stone. Fire him up as a wide receiver 1 every week.
I agree with that. And then next up, Davante Adams. This is where I like to start drafting receivers in the second round, is this kind of A tier. Davante Adams, obviously an elite talent, probably still a top 5 talent, really hasn't shown that he's fallen off in any metric. Still looks great on the field. The only reason that he's down here is just the quarterback change. We don't know how he's going to play with Jimmy Garoppolo. We have seen Jimmy Garoppolo, have support good wide receiver seasons in the past, but we still don't know how it's going to work on this offense because he's always worked around an offense which has a ton of talent and that he can just kind of be a game manager. So we'll see how that works, but Davante Adams is too talented to pass up in the second.
Next up is going to be A.J. Brown. He is a big play machine, scores lots of touchdowns. He's in a great offense with a great quarterback. So I see no reason why he couldn't go this high. Early second-round pick, especially in a half-point PPR that values those that catch the ball a little bit less but score a little bit more. He is perfect for this type of scoring format.
I think we're going to see a little bit more of he's going to have big games and he's going to have games that sort of disappoint you, but overall he's going to end up probably in the top 10. So it's sort of a preference. Do you like those big games that can win you weeks? Because if so, then he's absolutely going to be able to do that. He'll probably have some 2 and 3 touchdown games here and there. Next up, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Do want to mention that this is a half PPR just to sort of balance it out. We know some of you guys have PPR, some of you guys have standard. So we're doing half PPR just to sort of balance that out. We'd probably move him up a couple slots if this was PPR. So keep that in mind. He's going to get a lot of targets. First 6 week, no Jameson Williams. Obviously, that's going to be a good start for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And we know that he has a great connection with Jared Goff. We've seen it for 2 years now. He's never been bad for fantasy. Like, he just hasn't. And he's going to be consistent. He's going to get a lot of catches. He's going to give you a nice floor.
After that is Garrett Wilson, who is everyone's favorite breakout receiver this year. Huge quarterback upgrade over what they had last year to now Aaron Rodgers. He is an elite receiver. So really the sky's the limit here. Rodgers has come out and compared him to Davante Adams already. And I could see him being targeted as much as Davante Adams was with Rodgers. So he has huge breakout potential this year.
I don't really see him being in competition for targets. I think Aaron Rodgers doesn't really have an option, and whoever Aaron Rodgers likes, he's going to pepper with targets. We've seen that in the past, and I think that it's almost a shoe-in for Garrett Wilson.
Yep.
Next up, rounding off the A tier, we've got Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle, obviously, in that 1A, 1B situation, as long as Tua can stay healthy and distribute the ball to these two, and they can just make plays after the catch, they're just going to be explosive, both of these guys. So I'm totally okay with him as my wide receiver 1, even though he's the wide receiver 2 on the team. I would not be worried about that. As long as you're getting a good value on him in the second round, maybe the back of the second, sometimes you can get him. I know a lot of people do worry about him being the wide receiver 2 on his team, but just because of how explosive they are and the percentage of targets that are going to go to those two, it really doesn't matter. And I'm totally willing to take him at that spot.
Yep. Next up, to start off our B tier is Chris Olave. Chris Olave is a guy that you could easily put in the A tier. We kind of teetered the line, and we think he definitely could fit that A tier as well. So if you wanted to move him up with the Garrett Wilson and Jaylen Waddle group, we are perfectly fine with that. He has huge upside this year as he got a quarterback upgrade, in my opinion. And I know some people are worried about Michael Thomas coming back. First off, it's remained to be seen if Michael Thomas will even be healthy for more than 3 games. Second off, if Michael Thomas does come back, that might even help Chris Olave even more because it'll take some attention away from him. And we've seen in the past, Derek Carr has supported multiple really good fantasy options. And when he finds his guy he likes, he targets them a ton, a la Darren Waller, a la Davante Adams last year. Way back when they had Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree, he targeted Michael Crabtree a ton. So he can definitely support really good fantasy receivers.
He's going to give the team enough yards. They're going to be somewhere around the middle of the road. Maybe could he be even better in passing offense? And he is the number 1 guy. I wouldn't put any doubt there. We haven't seen Michael Thomas do it in how long? And his advanced metrics, he demands targets when he's out there on the field. He's an amazing talent. If he didn't get hurt last year, I think he was outpacing Garrett Wilson. So
he was.
Yeah. We love Chris Olave here. Again, he could be in between that A and B tier. I still would, be okay with him at the end of the second, early third. Next up, DeVonta Smith. This is in that next tier of receivers, where he is a wide receiver 2 on his team, but still an amazing talent. He just gets open. He's one of the best receivers. Talent-wise, he's up there. The only knock, yes, is that A.J. Brown is on his team, and so they are going to be splitting work a little bit. But I don't doubt Devontae's talent one bit, and that's the reason that I'm totally okay with taking him early third round-ish.
Next up is going to be T. Higgins, which I feel like T. Higgins in a half-point PPR is his best scoring format. And it's another one of these guys who is the second receiver on his team. But honestly, I would feel fine with maybe not being my wide receiver 1, but definitely my wide receiver 2 on my team. I think he provides some pretty solid floor and some scoring weeks. I do think his ceiling is capped with Jamar Chase being there. That's why he is a little bit lower, around 14th. So if you could get him sort of maybe mid to late third or early fourth, that would be prime for me.
Next up, we've got DK Metcalf. The thing about DK Metcalf this year, and the reason he's outside of our top 12 is, although he's been great, last year he was a little bit inconsistent, and I worry that there's going to be a little bit more of the same this year since the Seahawks drafted a first-round wide receiver, Jackson Smith and Jigba. So now there's 3 guys that you got to worry about, and all 3 are very talented. And you might think that DK is the most talented, and at this point, I think we have every reason to believe that. But the fact is that the 2 other guys there are very talented, and so there are going to be, there's going to be a lot of competition here, and that's the only reason I have him this low. but I would still be okay with him as my wide receiver 2.
Next is going to be Calvin Ridley. I love Calvin Ridley this year. Honestly, the only reason he's this low, I think, is just because we have not seen him play in almost 2 years, about a year and a half. So it's been a while. We've never seen him in this system or with this quarterback. But I think talent-wise, Calvin Ridley is one of the best receivers in the league. So I highly expect him to get it done this year for fantasy. I think he will be a very elite option. If you can score him in the 4th round, which I believe is his ADP currently,
Yep.
then that is a fantastic pick for me. If you can get 3 of these top, go a receiver in 2 or 3 of these rounds, and he could be your wide receiver 2 or 3, man, you're going to reek in the rewards, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. What I like to do is grab one of the top running backs and then just get a bunch of these guys before they dry up, because once we get out of this B tier range, they do drop down a little bit. Calvin Ridley, in the offseason, it's looking like he's going to be the guy who's on the field the most, the wide receiver that's on the field the most. I did worry about Christian Kirk a little bit earlier in the offseason, but it's looking like Christian Kirk isn't even going to line up in all 2 wide receiver sets. So it's looking to me like they're absolutely gunning for Calvin Ridley to be the number 1 guy. Only knock to me is that, yes, we haven't seen him do it, and we've never seen him really focus in on one receiver. He likes to spread the ball around a lot. But you could chalk that up to he's really never had a guy that demands that amount of attention, and I think Calvin Ridley could do that, so I'm willing to take that risk for that upside. And now we got Amari Cooper. The real scare for Amari Cooper, although he's a great player and he's a little younger than I thought he was. I think he's 29, so he's still, in my opinion, in his prime. He has, been known to be inconsistent, so there's that, but he also is a pretty explosive player when he hits. The question is, to you, do you think that Deshaun Watson can get it together with what he's done in the past? He wasn't great last year, but it was still enough to have a decent season for Amari Cooper. But if he can get it together and get to at least, a part of the early form of his career, then Amari Cooper could be a steal here.
All right, now to start off our C tier is going to be Keenan Allen. This is another guy that if this was full PPR rankings, he would definitely probably be at the upper end of this B tier. But because it is half-point PPR, we decided to knock him down to the top of the C tier just because most of his points come from receptions. But I absolutely love Keenan and all the Chargers this year, honestly. I think their offensive coordinator upgrade is going to make this offense absolutely deadly outside of just Austin Eckler. So I love Keenan Allen this year. I think he is going to be elite.
Go look at his game log last year. He caught so many passes. He gives you such a floor. If you're needing that in your draft, if you're looking like, I got a lot of boom bust players, I needed some floor, he's a good pick in these middle rounds. Next up, Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy's a risky pick. Obviously has upside, a very talented guy, a guy who can run great routes and get open, and we like that about him. He looks like the number 1 talent as far as pass catching options on the Denver Broncos. The only problem is Russell Wilson, who hasn't played super well in 2 years now. The hope here is that with Jeudy's talent and with Sean Payton coming in, that they can get it together and get it to their talented pass catchers, and Jerry Jeudy is the guy to do that.
Yep, agreed. Super talented player. Pretty risky thus far. He just hasn't been able to put it together, but hoping Sean Payton can.
He was decent last year, actually. If he can upgrade that a little bit, I like him here.
So next up is going to be DeAndre Hopkins, and this is one guy that I honestly have no idea which way it could go. If you told me DeAndre Hopkins was a top 10 receiver, I'd be like, yeah, it makes sense. And if you told me he was outside the top 30, I'd be like, yeah, in this offense, that makes sense. So we put him right here, right at our wide receiver 20 and half-point PPR. He is by far the alpha on his team as far as receiver goes, especially with Treylon Burks being banged up. I believe it was an LCL injury, so he's going to miss the rest of training camp at least and preseason. So I think you'll see DeAndre Hopkins by far lead the team in targets. Now, how many targets is that going to be with the Titans being so run heavy? We don't know. But, it is DeAndre Hopkins. You're getting a guy of his, Hall of Fame level talent. You can get him in like a late fifth round. So with how many targets he should see, I mean, A.J. Brown was able to succeed in this offense as the only guy. So I think DeAndre Hopkins could succeed in that role, not to the level A.J. Brown did because they're not the same type of players. But I could see him hitting 1,000 yards and maybe 6 to 8 touchdowns.
I think if he gets those targets, yeah, he'll be a good floor play. I worry about the offense in general with that offensive line. It is pretty much a disaster, so that's another thing to worry about. Maybe not quite the upside the other guys have here. Next up, Mike Williams. We really like Mike Williams. We talked about him on our values episode where we talked about the greatest values in ESPN Sleeper and Yahoo. You can get him super late. You can get him in about the 6th round and pretty much every fantasy platform. And the real thing here is that he looks to get his utilization a lot more consistent. So, he's really been consistently only targeted downfield, and Chargers didn't really do that enough last year. Part of that probably is because of, quarterback injury situation. But this year with a new offensive scheme coming in, I think the one last year was really bad. I don't see how it could get any worse. And they're looking to throw the ball downfield more, that we've heard, throw the ball downfield more and possibly get him more involved in the slot and just, get him some targets to get a baseline because he's a very explosive player. He can go up and get touchdowns and get long, deep downfield receptions. But if we can throw in, a target baseline, he's going to be an amazing value here.
DJ Moore comes in at our next pick. DJ Moore is another guy who is just, he has the very high highs and the very low lows of his career so far. I think most people think he's a very talented receiver, but he just has not been able to put it together consistently. He's always, I like to rank him right around my wide receiver 20 because that way you're not too far off when he booms, and then you're not too high when he busts because he's either wide receiver 10 or he's wide receiver 35 on a week because that's how boom or bust he's been in the past. I think going to Chicago with Justin Fields, that's probably the best quarterback he's ever played with. We haven't seen crazy passing stats from Fields yet in the NFL, but he also hasn't had any weapons. So I think giving him DJ Moore will unlock more Fields potential and vice versa. I know most people probably saw that preseason screen he took to the house. So that is a capability. I would not expect that to happen very often. And that play alone has probably pushed up his ADP a little bit. So be wary of that.
And it was an inaccurate pass.
And it was an inaccurate pass. So
if you're banking on Fields upgrading, I might be a little careful. But
yeah. So, he should by far lead his team in targets yet again. He has almost zero target competition in my opinion. So he's a very boom or bust-esque player that could take that next step.
The thing about that screen is that I think they're going to find ways to get him the ball. I mean, he's one of their most talented players for sure, so they're going to get the ball in his hands. I don't think it's going to be a disaster pick. Next up, Deebo Samuel. There's a lot of mouths to feed in San Francisco, and so we may be a little bit below ADP here. And it's a little scary, right? Because he's an extremely talented player. He could go out this season and get 20 touchdowns and just put it, just rub it in our face. But it's risky for me. There's too many. I mean, there's George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Ayuk, Deebo, right? You got to get the ball, and even Elijah Mitchell's going to work in. So it's just too many mouths to feed. I don't think he's going to be a consistent player. And he does have a history of injury. And when you put all those risks together, it's just a little bit too much for me to take him at ADP right now, although I can't blame you just because of how talented he is.
Yep. Next up is going to be Terry McLaurin to start off our D tier. So Terry McLaurin is a very consistent receiver. I believe he's had about 1,000-yard baseline every year.
I think it's 1,100, yeah.
Yeah, even though he's played with some horrible quarterbacks this year, probably is going to be the same. Howell could surprise all of us, but I am not expecting him to. So it's much going to be the same for Terry McLaurin. You're going to have some weeks that he scores and you're happy. He's going to have some weeks where he has 3 for 50 or 3 for 60, and you're going to be pretty upset. But he is a very talented receiver, and I would not be surprised if he had a breakout this year. But I would lean on the more lower end of his floor side, personally.
Yeah, so some new quarterbacks coming to town. You could see that as a positive, right? There's the upside with the quarterback change. Young quarterback coming in. But regardless, I think he has a pretty safe floor because he's done it with bad quarterbacks his entire career. And Our 25th and final receiver for this list, Christian Watson. Christian Watson was a touchdown machine last year. So in standard formats, he was amazing. And now he moves to Jordan Love. And when we've seen Jordan Love, he hasn't been amazing, but he hasn't played much. And so if he can get it together, I think the second half of the year for Christian Watson could be pretty good. And my guess is that they're going to get him more targets this year. Because last year, he did it on a very low target amount, and I think that he's a pretty good late-round target with upside just because of that. I think he has the upside to get his targets increased and still retain that red zone threat that he is.
Yep. All right, so now we've made it to our honorable mentions because, like we said, doing half-point PPR, there are some guys that lean, some way in standard, some guys that lean more in PPR, etc. So we did throw in some honorable mentions. Our first honorable mention is going to be Tyler Lockett. I don't think there's a single person out there that doesn't like Tyler Lockett, other than maybe Cardinals fans, because he seems to go prime Calvin Johnson on us every time he plays us. But he's been a top 15 receiver the past 5 years straight, like legit 5 years in a row, top 15. He's as solid as they get, but they've added another receiver, probably more talented receiver. We can't say that yet because we haven't seen it, but at least pedigree-wise, a more talented receiver. So just with that, and now having DK, JSN, and Tyler Lockett to feed, we don't expect them to pass enough to be able to support all three as a top 15, top 24 fantasy option weekly. So we did slide Tyler Lockett down a little bit, but even at our rank right now of 26, that is still ahead of his ADP, which I believe is 28 or 30, depending on what site you're drafting on. So even though we do like him a little bit ahead of ADP, and he does provide a solid floor.
Yes. The problem is the upside is limited this year with the two amazing receivers that he's got going against. And then the other two guys we have in the honorable mentions are Chris Godwin and Diontae Johnson. And we concluded these guys because if you're in PPR format, which we know a lot of people watching are, then they might crack our top 25. They're more PPR players, especially Diontae Johnson. We just know he's going to get peppered with targets. He has his whole career. Just wanted to include those guys. If you are in PPR, I think they're good floor plays. And that does it for our top 25 wide receivers. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the Fantasy Bros. And we are out.